So now that Tim Tszyu's fight against Erickson Lubin has basically fallen through, and it's basically confirmed that we're not getting that fight next, Tim Tszyu and his team have set their sights on facing potentially Terence Crawford or Vergil Ortiz next. In this video, I'll be talking about a potential matchup against Terence Crawford, previewing it, and giving you a very, very early prediction on this bout. Now, this is a really good fight if it does get made. I really hope it happens. I think as a fan of both fighters, because Tim Tszyu is probably my favorite up-and-coming fighter in the sport right now, and Terence Crawford's probably my favorite fighter in the sport right now, specifically due to the fact that Triple G is on his way out. He's pretty much done. Triple G's always been my guy, as my original fans know, but right now at this point, I would say Terence Crawford's my favorite fighter currently, and I think this would be a tremendous fight, and I do think this is probably the perfect fight for Terence Crawford to make right now. Now, if you look at Terence Crawford, and you look at the fights available for him, obviously, the Errol Spence rematch is still kind of there, but it's pretty much confirmed that it's not happening next. There's a Jerome Boots Ennis fight where he can go undisputed once again at 147. I don't think that's a bad option for him. I do think that win will also age very well for him, and I think it's a very good idea for him to take on Boots, shut up all the haters and all the doubters, and become a two-time undisputed champion at welterweight and get a very good win on his resume. It would also be a really good fight, and I think Boots is a really good fighter in the sport. I've always been very high on him. There's a potential Canelo Alvarez fight that he's been calling for, and I think that would be a very dumb decision. I don't think he should pursue that one at all. Now, obviously, if he beat Canelo Alvarez, he's an all-time great. Maybe, I would say if he beats Canelo, I would put him above Floyd Mayweather all-time and Manny Pacquiao. I just think that win would be so tremendous. There's no denying it. I know that his haters and his doubters are going to say Canelo slowed down. He's not the same fighter, but you got to realize Crawford's moving up 3 weight classes to take on an undisputed champion. He'll become undisputed in the second weight class, but moving up 3 weight classes to do it. However, I would not pick him to beat Canelo Alvarez, so all of these talks would end up going in vain because he wouldn't get the victory. So obviously, yes, there's a Canelo Alvarez fight as well, but I think that Tim Tszyu is the fight that makes the most sense for Crawford. It's the lowest risk, highest reward fight he can make right now. I feel that Tim Tszyu is probably around very similar level to Jerome Boots Ennis, but I think there's a higher reward in him becoming a 4-weight champion, because I believe he's a 3-weight champion right now. He'd become a 4-weight champion, so that's an absolutely tremendous feat. He's a 3-weight champion and undisputed 2-weight undisputed champion. He'd become a 4-weight champion while having 2 undisputed championship weight classes, championship runs. Being a 4-weight champion would really be good for him. I think that'd be a tremendous feat from the reach, especially due to the fact that he's been undisputed twice in 2 weights. Tim Tszyu's a really good name. I genuinely believe a Tim Tszyu victory will age very well for Terence Crawford. It's going to be a type of win where a couple years after, it's going to look very good for Crawford. I apologize for me stuttering. It's going to be a win where in hindsight, it's going to age very well for Crawford, because I feel Tim Tszyu is going to make a splash in the sport even after the Terence Crawford fight, especially if the experience that he will gain from a Terence Crawford fight. I genuinely believe that Tim Tszyu is probably the perfect fight for Terence Crawford to make right now. Now, obviously, Tim Tszyu is a really good fighter. It's not going to be a walk in the park for Crawford. And at the same time, Tim Tszyu isn't a pound-for-pound level fighter off of what he's accomplished. So even though he will get credit for the win, it's not going to be a bigger win than the Spence one or anything in that range. But it will be a really good win. It's a really good opponent for Crawford to take on. And I'm probably underestimating Tim Tszyu by the way I'm describing this fight. Tim Tszyu is a really good fighter. He's going to give Crawford a better fight than Errol Spence did. But what I see happening in this fight is I do see Crawford beating Tim Tszyu. I'm not 100% sure about a method, but I'm probably going to favor a late stoppage, maybe 10 or 11. The fight will probably be relatively competitive, but Crawford's just much more skilled than Tim Tszyu. I think Tim Tszyu gives Crawford more issues when it comes to his power and his strength and his pressure, but I feel Crawford's going to break him down and get a late stoppage. The thing about Terence Crawford, because a lot of people are going to point to the Mean Machine fight and say, oh, Tim Tszyu has some similarities to Mean Machine. I know they're not the same fighter, but there are some similarities. And people are going to say Mean Machine was able to drop Crawford early, even though that knockdown really wasn't a knockdown. It wasn't ruled a knockdown, and if you look at it, he hits Crawford, Crawford holds, and Mean Machine kind of moves him to the ground. It's not a knockdown. I don't understand why that's ruled consensus a knockdown. I really don't think it was. People are going to say he was dropped by Mean Machine early, had a really tough time, and then got him out of there. I think a fight against Tim Tszyu will be pretty similar to that, except I understand that Tim Tszyu is a much better fighter than Mean Machine and much bigger, but Crawford fights to the level of his competition, and I feel that Crawford showed that in the Errol Spence fight. A lot of times, fans and fighters themselves will say, oh, I fight to the level of my competition, and maybe there will be some truth to it, but Terence Crawford, his performance against Errol Spence in that fight was something generational. That was one of the greatest performances in a boxing match I've seen in my lifetime. For him to do that against Errol Spence in a 50-50 fight, I didn't have it as 50-50, but it was pretty much a consensus 50-50 fight. If you ask people on the internet, it was probably 55-45 Crawford. A lot of people were picking Errol. It was extremely split down the middle. And he made Errol Spence look like a D-minus level fighter. It was one of his easiest fights at welterweight, and he made a complete statement against a pound-for-pound or fringe pound. No, everyone had him on their pound-for-pound list. A lot of people had him on their top 5 pound-for-pound list. I personally didn't. I don't even remember if I had him on my list, to be honest, because he really didn't accomplish too much. I felt his resume was always very overrated. A lot of his best wins were Keith Thurman leftovers, and he was only a one-weight champion, which I understand isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but when you look at the names he beat and the run that he had, it really wasn't overwhelming in my opinion. But many people had him on their list. I believe Ring Magazine had him top 5, and Crawford completely outclassed him and got a very easy win. I see him rising to the occasion again against Tim Tszyu, probably getting a 10-for-11 round stoppage, being up on the cards 97-93, 98-92. It'll be a really good fight, and I feel this is the perfect fight for Crawford to make. Tim Tszyu is a really good fighter. He's one of my favorites at this moment. I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of him each time I see him in the ring. He takes on everyone. He looks really good and really strong and ambitious, and he looks like a young bull out there. But Terence Crawford is, in my opinion, the best fighter in the sport. I have him number 2 pound for pound, but I believe he's the best fighter in boxing. I think off of pure ability, pure skill. A lot of people think Inouye's a naturally better fighter than Crawford. I'm personally not one of them. I feel Crawford is a more skilled and more talented fighter than Inouye, Usyk, Bivol, etc. And I see him getting the job done against Tim Tszyu, but I think that's the fight that needs to be made for both of them. I think it would be a really good matchup. It would not be an easy fight for Terence Crawford. There's also opportunities for Virgil Ortiz to take on not really Crawford. There's an opportunity for Virgil Ortiz to take on Tim Tszyu. There's an opportunity for Crawford to fight Boots Ennis. Honestly, in a perfect world, what I would love to see them do is have Crawford fight Boots and Tim Tszyu fight Virgil and let the winners take each other on at 154. I think that would be really fun. I think it would be a nice little bracket. What I see happening is I probably would favor Crawford and Virgil to win, and I'd see Crawford fighting Virgil at 154. There's a lot of really good fights that could be made, though. I'm really anticipated for it. It's a shame that Erickson Lubin pulled out of his fight against Tim Tszyu, even though I understand that opens up a lot of really fun fights. That's the fight that should have happened. I felt it made the most sense for both of them, and honestly, it's kind of hard to pretend that this isn't a duck on Lubin's part. Very similar to when Frank Martin pulled out of Shakur Stevenson. There seems to be no real cause for him pulling out. I think he just knew what would happen. You know, it's obvious that Al Heyman doesn't like seeing all of his fighters lose whenever they fight fighters that aren't in his stable. Is Tim Tszyu even with Al Heyman? He might still is. I think he's still with Al Heyman, so I don't even understand why that would happen. But in general, that is a big kind of comical trend, but we're not going to get into that right now. Erickson Lubin probably knew what the outcome would be against Tim Tszyu. He knew that Tim Tszyu would end up beating him. Yes, he beat my boy Jesus Ramos. A lot of people claim it was a robbery. I actually don't think it was a robbery, but I do think Ramos is a much better fighter than Lubin. I hope they rematch, and I guarantee you guys that Jesus Ramos will defeat Lubin in a rematch. He'd probably even stop him this time. I'm really confident of it. Like, I can confidently tell you that Ramos would win a rematch against Lubin. I'm not a betting man. I would never bet in a fight because I just know what that would lead to, just an addiction of betting, but I especially know how I am. I would just keep doing it. I would want to keep betting over and over and over. But I'm not a betting man. But if I was, I would definitely pick Tim Tszyu over Lubin. I'd favor him by stoppage, but I also wouldn't. I'm not super confident. I apologize. I would pick Ramos to beat Lubin in the rematch. I would favor stoppage, but I'm not super confident he'd stop Lubin. I'm super confident he'd beat him. Stopping him is a different discussion. Anyways, Tim Tszyu would have beaten Lubin. Lubin knew that. That's why he turned down the fight. There's no other reason for him to. I don't see him taking on anyone higher value or higher money. Unless Errol Spence moves up to 154, there's no reason for him to turn down that fight. Anyways, you guys let me know your thoughts in the comment section about Terence Crawford and Tim Tszyu. I really hope it happens. I don't think it's going to happen if I had to predict, but I would love to see it happen. I think it'd be a great fight. It's the most logical fight for Terence Crawford. A Canelo fight is ridiculous. A Spence rematch we don't need to see. A Boots fight's a pretty good one as well, but he gets more out of beating Tim Tszyu. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. God bless. I'll see you guys later. Peace.